Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple points. Obviously, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation is at the center of an oil boom in North Dakota. In fact, approximately a third of all production in North Dakota actually occurs on the reservation. This issue of fractionalization is critically important in terms of getting access to the surface for various reasons that you would need to facilitate energy development, which a lot of folks are interested in. And I think you've got some folks who are very interested in the buyback program, but they aren't going to sell you their minerals. Certainly not there.
Right.
And so I want to see what you're doing or hear what you're doing to try and prioritize those areas where economic development by reducing fractionalization could be a key outcome. And what your relationship is. I know you just recently signed an agreement with Standing Rock, but what your relationship currently is with Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara.
I don't believe we do have a cooperative agreement with Fort Berthold right now. So, and quite frankly, I was up there about 6 weeks ago, and we had a great discussion about the activity, the oil and gas activity that was going on, the value of it, as well as the issues associated with that rapid pace of development. We actually did not get into much of a discussion on the buyback program. I think that's one. I was surprised by when I walked into their tribal headquarters and saw the map that was immediately in the foyer, and I hadn't realized how fractionated and how a lot of that particular reservation had been. So I think it's one of those situations where right now, and that's a factor in where we are looking at moving towards cooperative agreements and prioritizing communities that we are going to work with. In the 21 that we've done, it's the level of fractionation of which certainly Fort Berthold is up there. It's the level of interest by the tribe. It's the contiguous nature with other areas where we can do valuations that are similar and get some efficiencies of scale. And right now, I'm not quite sure where we are on their interest level.
Yeah, it's complicated because a lot of what we need to do in order to reduce flaring, what we need to do in order to move product depends on having access to the surface for, in some ways, temporary access to the surface. And so fractionated interest makes a big difference in terms of
Yes.
the ease of actually moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about cooperative agreements and where I guess I applaud that effort and applaud the consultation that needs to go into those cooperative agreements. One of the things we hear back is that they have found that the negotiating process for a cooperative agreement is complex and can be burdensome. So I want to know what you're doing to improve the process so that people don't think, well, we'll spend days and hours doing this and come back and nothing will happen from it, and how we can get more of these agreements done quicker so that we can begin the buyback process even that much faster.
So we've provided templates of our cooperative agreements that we have in place. The staff has had a webinar, which I think was pretty well attended.
Mike, can you tell me, are those kind of take it or leave it, or are those negotiable?
They're very much negotiable.
Okay.
Now, we have tried to set a framework of expectations. We have said that we expect that they're going to be in the neighborhood of $500,000. Part of that is because we think, estimate-wise, given the activities that we foresee being part of that cooperative agreement, that's about the cost. Part of it is trying to stay within our 15% overall administrative costs for the program itself. Having said that, there's a couple $100,000 either way on several of those agreements. It's because of the unique circumstances that exist on the reservations for which we have cooperative agreements and the activities. Some tribes don't want to have part of the valuation process. Some tribes, I think we've got 3 now who are assisting us with the appraisal process. So they're not cookie cutter. We've tried to set expectations and put a framework around it, but very much open to a negotiation process.
One final question. When you're looking at actually finding absentee landowners, what's been your experience as you look at maybe one owner wanting to sell and not being able to find the other 3 that have an interest?
I know that for efficiency purposes, we're focusing on those landowners that we identify that are available, that we know
Yeah.
are receiving the offer. And on the landowners that are whereabouts unknown, I don't think we're focusing on them at this point in time as an efficiency measure. But I can
Yeah.
supplement them for the
I guess my
record.
point is there might be one of these interests where you have one person who's interested in selling. That might be something that's critically important for the tribe to consolidate for purposes of economic development or further, build out of tourism, whatever it might be. And I think it's important that we don't simply hit a hurdle of an absentee landowner and then back away from that process.
And I think that's where the cooperative agreements and the relationships we have tribes, that the outreach and their priorities for acquisition that we're going to rely on in focusing the resources of the program.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I want to follow up a little bit on the appraisal issue because I think from what the Deputy Secretary said, it's appraisals that have been a challenge, and we all know that it's difficult to do appraisals in rural communities, much less appraisals in your community. And I want to just ask, if Mr. Hilo, I guess, if you were going to improve the appraisal process today, what would you change in what the department's doing?
Thank you. I think the first thing would be to bring the appraisal process under one line of authority, because right now that's bifurcated, and
You mentioned
and
that.
it adds for administrative delays and red tape that we've been bogged down with. So that's the first thing I would do is bring it under one line of authority. And secondly, I think there's tribes are capable of contracting for those services and doing them mass appraisals maybe much more efficiently than the department could. So, and every tribe's different. There isn't a cookie cutter fit to it, and so I think allowing that flexibility for each tribe to craft that appraisal scheme how they deem best would be probably the best approach in my opinion.
Did you consider that in negotiating your agreement?
I know appraisals were part of it, and I believe the interior, I think they are doing the appraisals in our,
But we heard testimony earlier from the Deputy Secretary that they are flexible on these agreements. And so if there were a structure that your tribe would be willing to kind of accommodate their concerns about appraisals, but expedite this process, is that something you guys have talked about?
I think we did discuss that process with them, and I'm not exactly sure how it was resolved or agreed upon, so.
Yeah, Carol, you expressed some frustration with the current agreement, the way it's written. Have you guys talked at all about an amended agreement, taking a look at other experiences, saying, I wish we had done it that way? And if you have, how has that request for modification been met?
In my testimony, I said that we have contacted them and they don't respond back to us, even though it's a requirement that they get back to us. And I believe that's where that's at, is that they just don't get back to you. And so then we have to continue to make the request.
So you have requested modification, but
Yes,
there's been no response back. Can we
I
talk?
can't say that in every instance, but I know it's happened numerous times.
So just one last question about appraisals, Flathead. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of actual appraisal impediments to the buyback program?
Well, I know we have every appraiser on the reservation working, and I think there's about 4 or 5 of them, and we can get the appraisals done. What I did is used a wrong figure. We have 60 appraisals done, and only 16 have been reviewed, so that makes us go back and start the process over. But, I think it's, I don't think the problem is with the appraisal, actually getting the appraisal done.
I'm trying to
on the ground.
understand why you have to, why you only have 5 days and then you have to start the process back over again.
Do you understand that? Go ahead, please.
George Waters, the tribe asked for a 5-day turnaround period. It wasn't something that the BIA foisted on them. They wanted to try and come up with a system where the BIA would respond quickly. In the 60 instances in which they submitted appraisals where there was a required 5-day turnaround, none of those timelines were met. They have to start over again.
What do you mean by start? You don't have to start the appraisal over again.
The appraisal, that part of the appraisal system just wasn't accepted, so they do begin the process again, as I understand it. And another big problem is BLM mapping. BLM's not going to come out to a reservation and do this. If BLM's data is contrary to the TAM's data, then BLM won't necessarily approve it. So there's not enough flexibility, as I understand it, from talking to the people running the program on the reservation, in both the mapping and the appraisal process, to sort of be realistic on day-to-day actions. It's just, those are both big delays.
So in light of those concerns, do you have concerns that you'll basically see this program expedited and implemented within the 10-year period?
Right now, they're a month into it, and they haven't done a single one yet. And they've got 11 months left. So
And you're just one reservation?
you know, the 12-month time frame is way too short. Arguably, the 10-year time frame is too short, and both bills in the House and Senate now would extend that, which I think would be a positive provision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Keep going if you'd like. You seem to be on a roll.
I just, it's always so frustrating to me, honestly, when you hear one side of the story, it's going well, we think we're on task, and then you all who have experience with this come to us and say, not really, we have concerns, we'd like some modifications. I asked if there was flexibility or whether these templates were set in stone, because I know how that goes. Some lawyer in the government says, here's the absolute provisions, and it's like it takes an act of God, never mind an act of Congress, to actually change that provision. Even though they say they're flexible, it just takes so long. And so what I'm hoping that we are going to try and do is take a look at those shortcomings from the experience that you've had and begin to expedite this process in a way that appreciates the government-to-government relationships and, nation-to-nation relationships that there ought to be. And, we have set a policy in this body and going forward of tribal self-determination. But every time we turn around on a major program like this, it doesn't seem like we have a lot of tribal self-determination, even though there's so many tribes that are ready to manage this and do this. And so I think given how difficult it is right now to get something changed in statute, we need to continue to push for accommodation in the implementation process that we have. And your testimony has been very valuable. I like this idea of consolidated appraisals, maybe getting to some kind of structure or certification of an appraiser so that process can work better. I like the idea of dealing and prioritizing tribal governments that have already done a great deal of title work, where those issues are ready to go and the allocation can be expended without a whole lot of risk that you're providing a buyback to someone or a payment to someone who doesn't technically own the land. But these are, I know how passionately from our tribal governments, and obviously I think every one of the tribes that is in North Dakota is in the top 40. Standing Rock is number 2. And so they are passionate about getting this done, and that's the dream of this settlement. We need to make sure that this dream gets implemented. And, I share, when's the next opportunity to do this? It's going to be far away. So I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that we continue to work with the committee. Obviously want to do legislation, but want to continue to hear a unified story in terms of implementation, and not, this is what we think is happening, and then have a group of people who have been working so closely with this system come to us and say, well, not really. That's been problematic for us. And so this is a big part of what we hope to accomplish as a result of the
I
settlement.
think the key with all this is communication, and good communication up and down the line, and hopefully there will be conversation started simply from your line of questioning.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I also think it's not just communication, because these guys talk to death, this issue to death, right? You've heard them say, we don't get any response, right? It's about listening and actually understanding that we are moving towards a tribal self-determination policy, and that everything that's contrary to that ought to be examined in fine-tooth detail about why aren't we giving the tribes more self-determination, recognizing that the statute didn't do that. I recognize that, but there's ways to accomplish self-determination beyond just a piece of legislation. And so I think it's critically important that we continue to put the pressure on DOI.
I agree.